Welcome to the Pastured Pig Podcast, where we share the successes and challenges of raising pigs on pasture. We talk to producers all over the country, from small homesteads to large commercial pasture operations. Whether you're new to pastured pigs or have been raising hogs for decades, we hope you hear new ideas and new perspectives on pasturing hogs. Here's your host, Troy McClung.
Hello, everybody. This is Troy. Welcome to the Pastured Pig Podcast. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on the intro here. Going to dive right into our interview, but do have a good discussion, something a little bit different with some desert pig farming. But just some updates going on here. We're again anticipating our new delivery of hogs. That should be soon, so we're going to do an episode on that. I promise. I know I keep dangling that carrot, but we'll do an episode discussing what's going on here at Red Tool House. It's been a day for ducks here recently. A little bit of snow, a little bit of rain, a lot of mud. So we've got a lot of that going on. But I'm going to go ahead and jump right into our conversation with Noah. Well, hello, everybody. Welcome to the Pastured Pig Podcast. Still rocking a head cold because I record these in batches. So if you listen to the last one and you think, wow, Troy stays sick forever. No, these are actually recorded in batches. So you may get a couple with me like this. But I'm excited to have a new guest with us tonight, of course. And this is going to be kind of unique. I'm excited to talk to Noah about his situation because Noah is in the southwest Arizona desert and he is farming where you wouldn't think that would be the logical place to farm, but I'm anxious to talk to him and see what he's got going on at Adobe Owl Ranch. So good evening, Noah. Welcome.
Hey, thanks, Troy, and I appreciate you having me on.
All right. Well, I appreciate you taking the time. I know you got a lot going on and you have a lot of balls to juggle right now, and I think we've got, just for the listeners, I know we've got just a little bit of a delay. Evidently in southwest Arizona, trying to reach southwest West Virginia, that's probably two of the deepest canyons to try to broadcast into, so we're getting a little bit of latency there.
Yeah. Well, I'm slightly less than 8 miles from the border with Mexico, so every once in a while I'll be driving along and it'll tell me that the welcome to Mexico on my phone, and then I have to call using the U.S. prefix in order just to get back to call somewhere here in the States. So it's not unusual that I have phones to do.
Does that affect your cell phone bill when you have to Buenos Dias from somewhere else?
Well, it affects the plan that I go with. I always make sure that I can call free from Mexico.
I got you. Yeah,
for sure.
That makes sense. All right, so we've discovered how far south you truly are. So let's talk about. My goodness, there's so much to unpack there. Without going back and having you recount your entire life story, why are you in southwest Arizona, and why are you deciding to farm there?
Well, I'm here actually because this is where the work was. I did some time in the military, and this is where I got offered a job about a year after I got out. So I actually teach here on Army base here at Fort Huachuca, which is the last of the old frontier posts. If you ever heard of those, Fort Apache and all those, we've got one left, Fort Huachuca. And I teach here on the post, and I grew up on a farm in the middle of Missouri, so, well, not the middle of nowhere, Missouri, actually, far north Missouri. And my dad was a hog farmer, commercial, sort of, I guess it probably was breeder hogs that they sent off at that point. It was mostly commercial for us. And then we also had cows and a couple of horses. My grandpa was a dairy farmer in Iowa long time ago, so I guess it's kind of in my blood somewhere along the line.
All right, so you're not a native Arizonan then. So you've got good old Midwest farm boy in you. Then it sounds like.
Oh yeah, well I was born in Iowa, and the whole, both sides both of my parents, their whole families are from Iowa, and it kind of goes east from there. Like I was telling you, and in those emails, I actually have relatives that were the people that were responsible for setting up Morgantown, West Virginia, or that's what the genealogy tells me. So
yeah,
we're probably Hicks from way back, if I was to guess.
That's right, Hicks going west. It sounds like.
Yeah.
All right, nothing wrong with that. That's for sure. Okay, so tell me about Adobe Owl Ranch. Hey, how you came across that? It sounds to me like you were stationed in that area, got work there, still doing work there, but then because of your farm blood, decided to take that on. So, how did you get your land? What kind of land are we talking about, and what challenges do you face?
Yeah. Well, I was never quite stationed here. My grandparents were north of here for a while, so I knew the area. But when I came out here, I knew I wanted to have some land mostly for my kids, so they'd be able to kind of experience some of the farm life that I grew up with, I guess. So when I started looking for properties, I was looking for something with a little bit of land, and I ended up down here. We're named after cows. I'm in Hereford, Arizona. So, or I guess pig. Well, it could be pigs, but out here it's cows. There's a lot of cows still, not many pigs.
Sure.
So I knew I wanted some land, so I found 10 acres down here, and this is kind of people think of a desert, and it is definitely, we don't get much rain, but it's not like if you've ever been to Phoenix or something like that. It's not that kind of just barren wasteland. We have a lot of native kind of shrub and brush, a lot of, if you've ever seen pictures of like desert landscapes where there's the little tufts of grass about maybe one every foot or two, that's what we have mostly, and a lot of mesquite trees. So as far as the name goes, so I bought this property, and it was the first one on the road that I live on, according to my neighbors anyway, which old out here, that means it was built in 1977.
Right, yeah.
So we're a little newer than everybody else in the country, but there is the oldest building on my property is actually, it's on my website and Facebook page, all that stuff, is this old broken down adobe building that I honestly can't tell what it was ever used for. It's too tall and too narrow, but it makes a great owl roost. So we've got barn owls that live out there about probably 8 months out of the year. And so I like owls, so I started taking pictures of them, and the whole thing kind of came together from there because, it's a unique name, I guess, really. Adobe Owl Ranch. It just it rolled off the tongue, so I went with it.
Yeah, definitely. Well, you're looking on your website here. There's several things that you've addressed there to come back to, but with the chickens you have, I'm sure that's another good reason for the owls to hang out. You have any issues with that?
No, well, you can't really see my chicken coop there, but everything I do out here, well, the chicken coop was here when I got the place, but everything I build to put chickens in, I make sure it's a 6-sided box. So it's got a roof and 4 sides, because it's not just the owls. We've got a lot of hawks. I hear there's some eagles and similar stuff up on the mountains. I haven't seen them myself. And then I have seen a wolf, and we have bears, but they don't come down here. But coyotes, javelinas, we got all kinds of animals. So
yeah,
I don't. Although the only actual deaths that I've had on my property were the result of my dog, so I can't really blame the wildlife too much.
Yeah, that's the way it goes. Yeah, so looking at your picture, and again, I'm ignorant because I've never been, other than Texas, I've never been west of the Mississippi. So looking at your pictures and thinking Arizona desert, I would not have imagined you would have as much green grass as you have. But looking at this one picture of your, looks like a pastured poultry tractor here, lots of green grass around it. The mesquite trees in the back are all nice and greened up, so it actually looks quite pleasant there.
So it was really nice when I took that picture. We're a high desert, and I don't know if it happens anywhere else in the country, we have a thing we call monsoon. So most of the year we get very little rain for most of the year, and then partway through July through part of August, we get daily downpours every afternoon. So that picture was taken right toward the end of monsoon, and everything it's a lush area. You wouldn't believe it was a desert driving through mid-August, but yeah, come the end of September, everything starts to be pretty dried out again. But
yeah,
it's kind of, I like it because I don't really care for too much precipitation. So I like being able to know that I can go outside anytime and work on stuff, and not worry about rain the way that you do, and people back
Oh,
back
yeah.
where I'm from.
Good Lord, you go nuts here in West Virginia right now. I think I'm growing web feet.
Yeah, I know. My folks are still in Missouri, and they had the worst flooding since '93, I think, there this year.
Wow.
So.
Well, let's talk about your pig setup. I know this is something you grew up with the history of that, and you've got that experience there as a young kid growing up. But talk about where you are right now with pigs.
So right now I got two. Well, I bought them as feeders, and they were maybe 60 pounds when I got them. They're two Duroc cross of some kind. I got them from another guy that's out in the middle of nowhere out here. So he said Duroc and I think Hampshire, but it looked like a Poland China boar to me. But so as you can see, I guess nobody that's listening can see, but they're all black, floppier pigs, which I wanted being out here because we get a lot of sunlight, and I'd heard about pigs having sunburn, and I didn't want to put anything through that. And the flop ears kind of came as a bonus, but they're also handy out here because it shields their eyes from the sun too, because there is a lot of sunlight. Even when it's not hot, it's pretty bright. You know, we're at high altitude. We're 4,400 feet, closer to the equator than you are. So I've had those pigs for several months now. They're going to be at least one of them. Like I said, I may keep the gilt, but the barrow for sure is going to go off to freezer land here by the end of the month or early in February.
Yeah. So what's your configuration right now as far as your setup goes, like a pasture or shelter? How are you dealing with that?
Well, I've got a 3-stall stable here that I use some of the time, especially if it's getting colder. I let them go in there. But I've also got a wood building. I don't think I've got any pictures on there, but it's kind of just a giant doghouse. But it's actually closed in, so when it gets cooler here, they can get in and stay warm. Although you've got pigs, you know, they rarely seem like they get cold. So
right, yeah.
But I've got right now everything is hog panel, 16 foot by 34 inch panels between T-posts. But I'm slowly, right now that's an area, I don't know, there's probably 20 or 30 of them strung together out there. But I've been moving them, or I'm planning on moving. I've got them in an area right now that they've completely cleared out for me, which is great because there won't be any tumbleweeds there next year. Because tumbleweeds are kind of the death to all of us down here. So that's kind of what I'm now. As my grandma used to say, when the world burns at the end of time, at the end of Revelations, it's going to be because some idiot lit a tumbleweed on fire.
That's hilarious.
So that's kind of the part of the land management that I plan on doing here. I've got a powerful fencer that I'm going to start putting up smaller paddocks. And with these two new breeders that I've got coming in, they're going to be moving around more, clearing out some of the undergrowth for me to kind of let some of the native grasses come back in. So right now it's all hard fences, but I've actually started yesterday stringing out my first electric fence because the fencer just came in the mail.
Yeah, all right. It's interesting you get on these rabbit trails, but talking about tumbleweeds, my 14-year-old, he'd never heard of such a thing, and we saw something on the news about, I guess, some wind issues and a car covered in tumbleweeds, and it just blew his mind. So we had to spend about 15 minutes talking about tumbleweeds. things you only think you. I'm sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say it's those things you only think you see on Roadrunner Coyote cartoons.
Yeah, well, I wish that was the only place I saw him. I actually work with a guy that's from up where that tumbleweed avalanche was, and we don't get it like that down here. They're not that big around. Probably a big one is maybe 2 feet from side to side.
Yeah.
But the problem is they'll stack up against any kind of structure you have. Like it's just like a snow fence. It is the same kind of thing. So you'll go out one day and you won't be able to get into a building because you'll have to smash all the tumbleweeds down. And then when you smash it, it's like smashing Cheerios. When you get done, there's just a little pile at the bottom. You think, how could that giant pile of tumbleweeds have ended up being 2 cups at the bottom of the door?
Right, yeah. Yeah, that's great. Oh my goodness! Well, I'm fascinated by what you're dealing with out there with topography. It just blows my mind that there's a place that's that dry, especially right now, as wet as it is here. So obviously you're talking about your pasture setup and expanding that with electric. Yeah, I think that the question that's probably going through a lot of people's minds are how challenging is this right now even with two pigs, with just the topography you're dealing with and the climate and all those type of things. How much of a struggle is this, or is it just just truck along?
Well, I have an advantage because I have a good off farm job. I could never afford to farm down here full time, so I have the advantage. This is a hobby for me, so I don't ever get too stressed about it. And I'm also apparently really lucky because I haven't had any breakouts, knock on wood, yet. And I'll tell you that probably the biggest problem I have here is either mesquite trees, which I always call them a zombie tree because you have to dig them completely out to kill them.
Yeah.
If you cut one off the ground, the next year you've got a bush.
Yeah.
And if you cut that off, the next year you got another bush. They just keep going until you pull them out.
Yeah, sounds like a sycamore tree.
And then the other, what's that?
As it sounds like a sycamore tree here. They're the same way. I call them alien trees because they just grow wherever.
Yeah, it kind of is. It's like that. And then the other thing is we have caliche down here, is what we call the kind of earth. So if you were to take a core sample, I've got about maybe 3 inches of sand with some clay mixed into it and some dirt. And, the top's kind of hard to tell. And then you get down and it gets kind of more coarse and a lot more sand. It's more solidly sand only until you get down about 2 or 3 feet. And it kind of becomes, it's like a solid clay, but dry. So, for example, yesterday I went out and I was putting ground stakes into this fencer. And, normally you could take like a piece of conduit, put a water hose in the end of it and sink it in the ground in about, I don't know, maybe 3 minutes where you're at.
Yeah.
I stood out there and fought with the thing for probably half an hour, pounded into the ground and all that. And I got 4 feet deep. And then it took me, I don't know how long with a T-post driver to get that 6 feet into the ground. And now I've got it wouldn't go any farther. So now I got a ground rod that's sticking 2 feet out of the ground.
Yeah. Yeah.
But it does ground the fence really well.
Yeah.
And T-post is the same way. You just wait you put all your posts into the ground right after it rains. And then the good thing, I guess, is once they're in, they don't move. So
exactly.
The pigs can come along and move them or scratch on them, and they don't move a bit. So.
Yeah, it's interesting. You talk about grounding rods. At our place, we have a lot of sandstone, so topsoil is only so many inches deep, and so I have to send my grounding rods in at an angle to get them in, and because we hit sandstone, and then if I ever want to move them for some reason, then I have to use my tractor bucket and actually pull them out because there ain't no way you're pulling it out by hand. But that's interesting. That's an interesting soil makeup. So what about water? I mean, I assume you probably have access to some public water. Do you have a well? Do you do rain catchment? What are your options there?
We don't actually have any public water out where I'm at. They're talking about it. There aren't that many of us. Well, where I'm at is zoned. You can't have more than one house every 4 acres. So, so it limits that. And so I've got a well that is presumably put in when the house was built. Actually, I think it's older than that. I've looked at some plat maps from back into the 50s, and there was a windmill here. Now, before that, there isn't a map that doesn't look like it was written by Columbus. But so we have a well here, and we're capped at the speed with which you can remove water from the ground. But most of, they keep talking about regulating this and regulating that, but most of us are extremely water conscious, much more than anywhere else I've ever lived. There's nobody, I don't know anybody that waters a lawn or does anything like that. I don't have any standing water. I use hog nipples for these pigs, and I've got them turned to where they can't just lay up against them and keep them running. So I'm pretty conscious with my water. Even my chickens are the same sort of a thing, where they are on a system where they have to do something to get water out. Because I don't want to. In fact, the dogs and the cat are on the same deal too. I don't want to have any water sitting around that'll evaporate and waste. And I do have a water catchment system also, because those monsoons I was talking about. My house, I don't know, I think it's about 2,000 square feet of flat roof, and I pull water off one side into an 800-gallon container, and it'll fill that between 45 minutes and 2 hours of rain here. So it really comes down when it comes down. So I am working on getting more. I want to put in an underground tank for livestock and all that, but that's obviously off into the future somewhere. But that'll drastically cut down the amount of water that I use.
Yeah, so it sounds like right now with your well being your primary source, and then the amount of catchment you're doing, then that could be probably your biggest hurdle with scaling up as far as any type of livestock goes, or anything for that matter as far as water consumption.
Yeah, the water table here it's funny. So I'm about 4,500 square feet. If you go, I'm next to one of those rivers that runs the wrong way. It runs to the north, as I understand. But if you go downhill to the north, it's about 40 miles. There's actually still artesian wells. If you look up St. David, Missouri, or St. David, Arizona, there's artesian wells, and you can go down there and turn them on, and the water will shoot up into the sky. So
wow.
There's water here. It's just a matter of getting to it, and obviously, I try to conserve all I can.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, what about feed for your pigs? Looking at your social media and your website, you've got some interesting stuff going on there. So, tell us about that a little bit.
Yeah, you're probably looking at the scraps there, I suppose.
Yeah.
So, I actually have a feed store right around the corner. That's a couple of really good people, Jim's Feed. They really take care of if I want any kind of packaged feed. And what you're probably seeing with the produce is, I don't know if it happens other places, but here local, there's like a nonprofit that goes around and they get food that you can't sell in the grocery store anymore. So the stuff that's out of date, or has a blemish of some kind or something, and they bring it to a couple of locations, and they actually sell it for I don't know, pennies on the dollar for human consumption. But all the stuff that doesn't go into those, they give to some of the local farmers. So myself and a couple other guys, pull a trailer over and load it up with boxes and boxes of zucchini and that kind of stuff that doesn't keep real well. And how the pigs don't really like it until it's pretty bad. So they get a treat every once in a while with that.
Exactly.
I have heard that there's an actual feed mill in Wilcox, which is up on I-10, where I can get feed by the ton. But I haven't gotten to the point where that would be advantageous for me, because it's about probably about a 70-mile drive to get over there. So, yeah, I'd have to have a lot more pigs to make that worth it, I think.
Definitely. Yeah. It's again, the scalability thing, and then, of course, storing it, all of those issues that go along with that. So it sounds like some of this post-consumer waste is really helping offset feed expenses there from time to time for you.
Yeah, and I kind of look at a pig. They're not happy unless they have something to play with. So I try to leave them some of that kind of stuff out there so they can nose around, especially down here where there isn't nearly as much, I guess, greenery coming out of the ground. Although you see those mesquite trees, and if I don't leave something out for them, they'll go along and they actually eat the ends of the mesquite branches. So they do keep themselves busy. But.
Right. Yep. Yeah, they'll nibble and everything. Do they try to uproot any of the smaller mesquite? Do they dig the roots out or anything? Or are they not really rooting much?
They root a little bit in places where there's more soil and less sand, and I obviously don't encourage that. That's part of the reason I'm getting ready to start moving them around, because I want them to root enough in the places where it's just sand to turn things over and kind of work things in. But it's, even for a pig, it's pretty hard dirt out here. So they don't root too much other than, making nests and that kind of stuff. They do, they root up under the trees, but they haven't succeeded in killing any mesquite trees yet, which I'm kind of disappointed at.
Yeah, exactly. So is there a rotational process in play, or you just kind of leave them in that paddock? And I know you said you're expanding your electric. Is there going to be a rotation element there? Are you seeing any soil improvements already with what they're doing, and of course their manure and those type of things?
So my rotation is starting really soon. I'm getting the lines put in for that, which is kind of perfect. I mean, you know how it is with different areas, you want to leave them different places for different amounts of time. So right now, when I first put them in there, it was all grown up in these, not only the tumbleweeds, but also we've got this desert broom thing that is, I don't even know how to describe it. It's like a weed bush, I guess. It's kind of like a tree, but they just grow everywhere. So they've succeeded in knocking a couple of those down and trampling them out, and just kind of disturbing all the soil there. So I think next year I'm going to come along with some natural or some local grass seed and see if I can get that started and probably let that rest for a year. And I'm going to start rotating them through the more eastern side of my property where there's a little bit more moisture content on that side of the property than there is on the west. On the western side, and my neighbor's farther away over there, so I don't think they'll complain.
Yeah, so I assume with obviously, like you said, expanding your rain catchment, that can open up more doors as far as land improvement goes, having water in various places so you can move the pigs further out, doing those type of things. So do you see... I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, I'm next year, when it starts getting wetter, I am going to put in a few water lines underground and electric lines. I'm going to run, well, not together, but I'm going to run a couple of different places out so I can have either, different paddocks for them to have water in, so I don't have to, because right now I got hoses, and the sun, as you probably know, is pretty bad on hoses. So I'm going to put a couple hydrants out and have places where I can put either a heat lamp if I have farrowing, because we're kind of backwards out here where I actually want to butcher in the winter, because in June it might be 115 degrees and it's real hard to get meat to come down to temperature at that point. Yeah. So I want to butcher in the winter. So my farrowing schedule, I still got to figure out when I get these breeders in, but I've still got some time for that.
So are you going to process on farm just for self-consumption, or are you taking it somewhere to be butchered?
Well, one of the first one, at least here, which is, like I said, going to be real soon, I'm going to do here on the farm, because I work with a guy who's interested. Well, I actually work with two guys who are interested in seeing it done, and my dad's going to be down. And I'm a big believer, in, I guess, passing knowledge along. And I was a pretty small kid when my dad was doing all this stuff, so I remember him doing it, but I was never involved. So while he's down, I want him to show me how he was doing it back when I remember. And my family's all a bunch of people that didn't have kids until they were older than average. So my grandparents were born in the really early 1900s. So I imagine that we probably have a few different, between my dad and a couple uncles, they probably have a couple of different ways of remembering how to do things that might have not otherwise made it, at least to where I'm at.
Yeah.
So at least a few are going to happen here. And then we do have USDA processor in Tucson, which there's an agricultural university or part of the university up there. And that's about probably an hour and a half, maybe, if I wanted to do that kind of stuff. And I think there's some more off to the east also. I haven't really investigated that direction, but there's a lot of cows down here. There's not many pigs. There's a lot of cows.
Yeah. Yeah. So, I think processing your own pork is something everyone should do at least once, so you can appreciate the work that goes into it and get a better understanding of of your processor in that relationship, and kind of know from their perspective what all it takes and all the details that go into it.
Yeah, for sure. Well, and I hope that, my son's 4, but I hope in time, I can pass things along to him too, because it seems a shame that things, just because we found a simpler, more electrified way of doing things, it seems a shame to just let everything go to the past,
Yeah, no, I agree. Absolutely. So, Noah, what do you think as far as moving forward? You kind of talked about within the next year, but what do you think 4 years, 5 years down the road? What does it look like? Are you thinking expanding your pork operation? Do you get into sales, or do you kind of stay at the homestead level as far as raising your own pork?
I think by then, what I'd least like to see is be able to sell. I probably don't plan on ever selling cuts, but I'd like to be able to sell quarters or halves, or maybe even whole hogs. But the hogs I'm getting it'll probably be whole hogs, because I'm getting the guinea hogs, so they ain't that big to start with. But I'd like to sell those, because there's a lot of people down here that are either very health conscious or, loyal or local driven, that sort of a thing. So I think I have a market in the area. It's just a matter of tapping into it and showing people what it is that they can get local when they're used to, bringing their pork from wherever it is that it comes from here local. I don't actually know, probably California if I was to guess.
Yeah, yeah.
So I think, that's kind of my thought, is to be able to break into more of the health folks and the local driven. We've got a little town over here, Bisbee, which used to be a gigantic town way back in the day, which is all sorts of hippies, and I'm not one, but I can appreciate some of the stuff that they think. So I think I at least have some market over there.
Yeah. Well, that's finding that niche market where you can either provide value-added product or just get a customer base that appreciates the uniqueness of what you're raising, and it makes it worthwhile.
Yeah, that's my thought. And like I said, I know they're out there because we have a lot of local beef, and then just across probably 45 minutes from me, there's actually some people raising lambs and stuff like that the other side of the mountain. So there's definitely a market. It's just about getting into it.
Yeah. All right. Well, good. Well, as we get close to drawing to the end here, one question I ask everybody on our podcast, of course, is what is your favorite part or favorite experience so far in raising pigs on pasture?
Oh boy, I think probably my personal favorite thing, and I kind of it's a 2-part deal. I really get a kick out of watching my kids. These pigs are real tame. So my kids will be out there riding their bicycles around, and they'll occasionally jump off and go over and rub a pig on the head or something, and then go back, and just seeing the interaction between I guess pasture raised kids and my animals, because I just don't think, a lot of people don't get that kind of opportunity. They're so separated from things, and these kids don't even think any other way. They can't imagine. I wouldn't think living like they did before they can remember, But I think as far as if it was just me and some pigs, I can't help but laugh every time I see one of these things run.
Yeah.
They're so happy and so ungainly when they're running that it just makes me laugh every time.
Yeah, they're incredibly entertaining animal, that's for sure. Well, let me ask you about your kids real quick. So your kids are old enough to kind of understand what's going on there. So have you had the discussion as to that this is food walking around, or you think that's going to be an issue that has to be broached?
No, we discussed that kind of stuff, and we've had the chickens for a couple of years. And right when we got the chickens, we had a discussion about how these are not, they're not like the cats or the dogs that are animals that we name and are keeping around as pets, that they know that when the chickens stop laying, they're going to go into chicken stew or whatever it is. And we just kind of carried that on to the pigs. I said, these are animals that are here, and they're I show the first thing I did was show them where bacon comes from, because who doesn't like bacon?
That's right, exactly.
So it does make a macabre conversation once in a while when they ask when they're going to be killed, but I think as much as a 4 and a 6-year-old can understand, they do.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah, and I'll never forget the first time we had pigs, and of course we did the typical. We raised 3, and we were going to process 1 and breed the other. So our boys were much younger. They were probably around that 4-year-old age as well, and maybe a little bit older. And so we're sitting around the dinner table, and we're having our first dose of pork that we raised. And the boys had named the pigs, which I was a little leery of, but this one pig that we processed was named Notch because it had the most prominent notches in its ears from the farmer we got it from. And so my oldest, I just remember him setting down his fork at one point. He said, "Is this Notch? Are we eating Notch right now?" And I said, "Yeah, son, we are. This is the animal that we raised, and now we're going to enjoy it." And he said, "Wow, Notch really tastes good." So I knew at that point that I convinced them at least that there's no harm in enjoying the spoils of our efforts.
No, and I would assume that we're both on the same page. I don't understand people that don't want to know where their food comes from, and I'm far from a vegetarian, but I kind of feel like if you're unwilling to ever dispatch an animal to be eaten, I'm not sure you ought to be allowed to. It's just, you don't know what it is that goes on. There's a lot of, it doesn't come out in a little white tray with, plastic wrapped across the top. They don't even slice their own pork chops. There's no work that goes into any of it.
Right.
I think that there's something, you appreciate things more when you see them up close like that.
Well, yeah, and again, not to get macabre here, but when you think about dispatching an animal, and I had this conversation with somebody just the other day that they said, "Well, I eat meat, but I could never raise my own animals and kill them. I just, I'm not that cruel that I could kill my own animals." And I said, "Well, then you're fine with somebody else doing the dirty work then, because you still eat the meat. So you want somebody else to do. It's like you're hiring a hitman to some degree. So you're okay with that process, which again, everyone has their own opinion, and that's fine. But when you appreciate the work you put into raising it, and then when we've processed on farm, even chickens for that matter, you appreciate it. It's a very serious matter for us to go dispatch an animal that we've put all this time into. And I tell you one thing, we don't waste anything. If I spent the time and money and effort and infrastructure to raise an animal, I'm not going to discard it. I give my boys a hard time if there's a slightest little piece of pork chop left. It's like, hey, do you know how hard it was to raise that? You need to eat all of that. So I agree. I think there's that disconnect is something that needs to be changed. People need to understand at least where their food comes from, and they need to actually have their hands on it at some point. And I think that would change a lot of opinions about a lot of things in our food system.
Yeah, I agree. And I'm kind of kidding. I'm not saying you shouldn't be allowed to eat meat, but that was the nearest way I could think of to say it. But I also, what I think of here is I'm raising chickens and these 2 pigs, and there's more on the way, and everything I have, I do everything to make sure that they have the best life that they can have while they're here. I don't want to have, anybody that has never grown anything and then has eaten it wants to treat it as well as they can. Yeah. If for no other reason than the selfish reason that it'll taste better, but also because who wants to see something suffer? If I go out there and something is, they're unhappy or there's something wrong or, somebody's stuck in a fence or something, I'm going to drop everything to make sure that gets fixed because I don't want to see any animal suffer. I'm going to go take care of business, and then when the time comes, then I'm going to take care of business as quickly and humanely as possible then too.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, good. Well, no, I really appreciate you taking the time to come on, and I know you were with our time difference here and schedule and stuff that it was something we had to work out. But I appreciate you taking the time to talk with me. It's interesting to hear somebody doing what we do here in West Virginia, but in a totally different climate, different setup, and it's just very interesting to me. So I appreciate you taking the time to come talk with me.
Well, I appreciate you with your podcast because I've learned a lot listening to you and your other guests, I guess. And maybe, as time goes on here, I'll shoot you another email at some point. We may be able to kind of catch up again on how things go.
Yeah.
I'm learning things, and I can only imagine that there's somebody else out there that's trying to do what I'm doing. Because I've looked, I couldn't find anybody raising pigs in the desert, so
right,
maybe I'm just the only idiot trying it. But.
Well, and that's, you make an interesting point there, because I'd like to think that, the more I do this podcast, the more I realize how little I know about raising pigs, just because there's so much to know, and you just learn constantly. And so I think, we're, in the 30s as far as episode goes. So that means I've done 30 plus interviews, and learn something from somebody every time, whether it's some of these guys that are producing hundreds if not thousands of pigs a year, to somebody just starting out, or somebody doing it on the family level, like kind of like where you are right now. It's just really fascinating to hear all these different setups, but with the same goal in mind, to have control of our food, know where it comes from, and then possibly generate some income from it. But it's just an incredible learning experience, and I appreciate everyone that comes on and shares, and I'm anxious to just get the next batch of people talking. So again, I appreciate you coming on and letting us understand and take a peek at what you got going on there.
Thank you. No worries on my end.
All right. Well, if anyone wants to find out more about Adobe Owl Ranch, where can they find you?
Well, right now I do Facebook and Instagram, and either one of those I've got a Facebook, I guess it's a business page, even though I don't sell anything. That's at Adobe Owl Ranch, and it's ADOBE, like the old Spanish building. Mm-hmm. Same thing on Instagram, and then we do have the website, which is www.adobeowlranch.com. And I try to get things on there as much as I can, but I'm like everybody else. I'm kind of short on time, so right now it's pretty sparse.
Yep, that's the way it goes. Well, all right. Well, no, I appreciate you taking the time, and I'm going to let you go so you can enjoy the rest of your evening. And your evening's just getting started, actually, where you are. So you have some time to kill then.
Yeah.
All right. Well, man,
sure.
Have a good evening. Take care. Well, I really appreciate Noah taking the time to talk with me. It's interesting what he's got going on there in the high elevation desert. Be curious to follow up with him. He's just getting started, just getting some of these things in place. Be curious to follow up with him in a couple of years and see how things are going, see if he's overcome some of those challenges he faces. Well, if you know anyone or would like to be on the podcast, by all means, please go to redtoolhouse.com, click on the Pasture Pig Podcast link. You can fill out that form. And I apologize, I think I may have mentioned this already. The form wasn't working. I didn't realize it. So some of you guys that have filled out the form and wonder if I haven't contacted you, why not? That's why. So if you have not heard back from me yet, then just know that your form got broadcast into the abyss and I didn't get it. So please reach out. I'm not ignoring anyone. I will respond to you one way or the other. If you have not heard back from me, that means I did not get your input. So please resubmit. I think I've got everything all figured out there now. Well, I appreciate everybody taking the time to listen to the podcast. I pray you have a good week out in the pasture and you get to spend time with your pigs. All right, take care.
We hope you have enjoyed this episode of the Pastured Pig Podcast. To learn more about our podcast, or to submit topics, or recommend guests for future episodes, visit redtoolhouse.com.